Welcome back to the Fairweather Fan Podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Today, I am going to be talking about a range of different topics. Whenever I go 4 days without making one of these things, it seems like the sports world just blows up. NBA, NASCAR, NHL, baseball probably. Usually there's something bad happening with baseball in the news. Everything. So we've got a lot to talk about today. It's 25 minutes until the Sixers play the Nuggets, so this is probably coming out tomorrow. I'm recording this on March 30th, and so this is coming out the 31st, presumably, because I want to have time to edit this later tonight and then upload it tomorrow. And then all the short clips and all that stuff will be coming out on the first day of April. First thing I want to talk about, why is the MLB dying right now? And I'm going to start talking later on, I'm going to go really in depth about some of the reasons that sports are dying, and that's probably going to wind up being a separate clip on its own. Not like it'll still be in this podcast, but it'll probably wind up on other platforms as well. But why is the MLB dying? Because Anthony Corby can't catch a game on a Thursday afternoon, and neither can 80% of the United States population. Well, I shouldn't say that. It's probably 60% of the United States population that has a day job and currently isn't working from home. Well, that actually probably winds up accounting for about 30%, but the people that do work from home have to be hands-on, at least in some way. That probably adds up to about 60% of Philadelphia Phillies fans that cannot watch this opening day game without taking a vacation day or otherwise. So just a quick rant on the MLB, and it's not just the Phillies. Okay, it's a lot of teams have opening day games this year. And they are Thursday afternoon. So let me read off the list of teams that cannot, or that you cannot watch if you have a day job or take college classes on Thursday afternoon. The Yankees, that's a big market. And how about this one, the supplement? Blue Jays, Toronto, Cleveland and Detroit, well, both those teams are projected to stink, so no one cares. Orioles and Red Sox. Red Sox are kind of mediocre. Orioles, also nobody cares. Twins and Brewers, maybe. Pirates and Cubs. Now, the Cubs are a big one, even though they kind of suck as of late. You know, the Cubs are always a big market team, and a lot of people like watching them, even though they suck. They did it for 108 years. So, what's another day that they can't that they can't watch a game, I guess, is the reasoning behind this. Atlanta is a pretty big market. Atlanta Braves. Philadelphia, that's also a pretty big market. Braves went to the NLCS last year, so that's obviously a pretty big thing. And, given the fact that that's happening on the East Coast at 3:05 p.m. Eastern Time, not necessarily a good thing for the MLB. Now, how about this one, though? 4:10 Eastern Time. 1:10 on the West Coast, because these are both West Coast teams. The Dodgers playing the Rockies, and the Diamondbacks playing the Padres. And the Padres have a huge bandwagon market this year, so maybe it might not be relevant if, you're a college student and your classes are done by 4:10 Eastern Time. But the Dodgers... the Dodgers, here's what I have to admit about the Dodgers. Their fan base, for the most part, is loyal. So they would never cheer for the Angels over there, even if the Angels were really, really good. And the Angels were really, really good in the early 2000s, and they still stuck with the Dodgers. So all those people wearing the Dodgers hats aren't going to be able to watch their team. Cardinals and Reds, no one really cares. St. Louis a little bit. Texas Rangers, well, Dallas is a big market. No one really cares about the Royals anymore. They're a small market anyway. Rays and Marlins, that's not even really something that's happening. And that's it. Let me see. 11 total games occurring on Thursday during work hours. And by work hours, I mean 9 to 5. And even if you work 8 to 4, you're still not, unless you live 10 minutes away from your job, you're not going to be able to catch the start of these games. So, great job, MLB. You have yet again made an expert marketing decision to have your opening day games, the most important games of the year up until October, with the exception of perhaps the All-Star game. You have 8 of them scheduled during work hours, including the Yankees, who are a favorite for the title this year, the Braves, who went to the NLCS last year and are a big market, and the Dodgers, who also play at 110 local time and won the World Series last year. So if there is ever a way to get fans to not watch, the games that they're most likely to watch, I guess this is it. So, great job, Rob Manfred. You continue to ruin the sport. You absolute disgrace. Moving on now, we've got NBA to talk about. That's probably what drew you into this video, is my question about, are the Brooklyn Nets cheating? And you probably expect me to give some answer about how the Nets, oh yeah, they're definitely cheating. There are these rules, these bylaws that exist. No. The short answer is no. They are not cheating. The long answer is the NBA needs to change its rules. And I'm removing myself as a Sixers fan here and talking merely about this as a fan of the sport, as a fan of any sport. Super teams make the league less interesting. Even when the Sixers sucked. Well, to be fair, I am a Fairweather fan, so I didn't really cheer for the Sixers then. But I didn't cheer for any team, really, for the span of a couple of years. But even the last year with the Warriors and the Cavaliers, even that, to me, was uninteresting. Even you could make the excuse the Bulls were uninteresting, but still, super teams, in general, make this league uninteresting. And part of the reason why I just let off with that talk about the MLB and why they're losing fans, part of the reason people are walking away from the MLB in markets other than New York, Atlanta, perhaps Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and perhaps San Diego, and maybe Chicago, are the fact that there is a lack of competition from small market teams anymore. And in the MLB, the Tampa Bay Rays, yeah, they just made the World Series. When was the last time a small market team made the World Series before that? It had to have been, the Royals? I mean, I wouldn't call Cleveland a small market by any stretch of the imagination. To an extent, Cleveland is a small market, but that was also still back in 2016. 2017 World Series, Houston, 5th largest metropolitan area in the United States or something up there, versus Los Angeles, which is huge if you haven't been out there. 2018, who was it? It was a Red Sox, Boston, and the Dodgers, Los Angeles. There you go. Boston, big market. Los Angeles, big market. 2019, Washington, the Nationals, against Houston again, big markets. 2020, Los Angeles Dodgers, and then the first small market team. And the way that the Rays built their team is genius. I mean, even though they lost that series, the way that they built that team, they relied heavily on coaching, heavily on prospects, and even though he made a really bonehead decision to pull Blake Snell in Game 6 last year, Kevin Cash is a great manager. Hands down. Can't deny that. They had great pitching coaches for years. Kyle Snyder. They had the guy that went to Toronto, I think. Before that, they're a really, really, they were the epitome of building a small market team. Like how to build a small market team. It was textbook. But the reason why the Rays were the first small market team to make the World Series in 4 years was because of the MLB's luxury tax rule, which gives money to smaller teams, yes, but also doesn't really help them make that much of a difference when the top teams in the league can spend money free will to get whichever players they want. I mean, the Rays' entire payroll, I think, is somewhere around $60 million. Let me get the exact statistic now, because it might have changed a little bit since the last time I looked at this. But there is a huge, huge wealth disparity in the MLB. Current largest payroll in the MLB is $239,572,000. I'm not going to read the whole number. Dollars. And it's the Los Angeles Dodgers. And that's with only 26 players on the roster. $239 million total payroll. Bottom of the league this season, the Cleveland No-Names. with 39 million. So there you go, 200 million less dollars at the very bottom of the league of the Cleveland no names. Above that is Pittsburgh with 43, Baltimore with 45, Miami with 47, which is a pretty long way off from the Dodgers at 239, Yankees at 197, and Mets at 185 million. And if you scroll down the list, pretty much the top 8 teams playing in big markets. Then you have the Padres, kind of a big market. St. Louis, also kind of a big market. San Francisco, Chicago, huge markets. Toronto, Atlanta, another Chicago team. League average is 119 million. But there is a $200 million disparity between the team spending the most money in the league and the team spending the least money in the league. And so with the NBA, what we have now is basically the NBA has realized that because of the Cleveland versus Golden State Warrior championships, the 4 consecutive ones from a few years ago, that they could basically do that again and make a profit off of that by having super teams in the biggest markets. And that's why none of these trades have been vetoed at all. That's why the rules are really ridiculous at this point in time. And so the only way to fix this is to have a hard cap, like the NHL. Because think about this. You might think, the NHL, who really cares? No one's watching the NHL anyway. People are tuning in to see large market teams. Okay, but then you have people, as a result, are bandwagoning, and I'm going to talk about this actually a little bit more. I'm going to hold off on the talk about bandwagoning. But you talk about cap space, and you talk about total payroll, and most of these teams are pretty even. I want to try to get the exact spending of each team, but so the Toronto Maple Leafs have the largest estimated total cap hit at 82 million. The Chicago Blackhawks have the lowest at 65 million, but they have 15 million in total cap space, which would also get up to around 80 million. But they're currently kind of a rebuilding team. All these teams have a hard cap. There is a cap. A certain amount of money that you have to be within the limit of, that you have to pay your players. And do you know what the benefit of having a hard cap is? Well, let's take a look at the league standings right now. Just the league as a whole. And I know there's different divisions and things are funky. Top team in the league, Tampa Bay. Kind of a medium market, 50 points. Washington, big market, who cares, 50. Vegas. Not that big of a market, still a new market, 49. Carolina, definitely not a big market, 49 points. Colorado, Denver, kind of, 48 points. Florida, well, you might think Miami, yeah, but they don't play in Miami. They play 40 miles north of Miami, or 40 minutes, whatever, on a good day. So, not a big market, 48 points still. Below them, a New York team. Below the team that plays in the middle of nowhere are the New York Islanders, and they are the highest New York team. And then you have Pittsburgh, who are traditionally a hockey city. Toronto, big market. There are obviously going to be glitches and stuff like that, but look at these top 10 teams. You've got Vegas, new market. Carolina, small market. Florida, also small market. Winnipeg, Canadians are crazy about hockey. But then you scroll down, look at some of the last teams in the league. Buffalo is a disaster just from a management standpoint. But Anaheim, that whole LA County, Orange County area, you would think that a team like Anaheim, at least in the MLB, would be a lot higher in the standings. Ottawa, Detroit, that's a pretty big market. New Jersey, they suck notoriously. Dallas, San Jose, Los Angeles, the Rangers. These are all teams 20th or below. And New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, some of the biggest markets, Anaheim, some of the biggest markets in the country, are not first in the standings. Do you know why that is? Because they have a salary cap, a hard salary cap, which makes the league interesting. And so people will tune into the playoffs every year regardless, kind of like how people tune into March Madness every year regardless, even though some programs spend more than others, and there's, this is kind of comparing apples to oranges. But the main reason people tune into March Madness is because there are these upsets. We watch March Madness for the Cinderella stories. We don't want to see, who are the first seeds this year? Gonzaga, Michigan, Baylor, and I don't know, Illinois. We don't tune in to watch those teams go far. We tune in because teams like Loyola Chicago can beat teams like Illinois. Teams like, who are those guys from Maryland a few years ago that took out Virginia? But you get it. UNBC, I don't know. Somebody from Maryland. But you tune in to watch March Madness for the same reason you tune in to watch the NHL. Because it's entertaining and because there are upsets. Yeah, basically. That's and to watch the sport as well. I know it's kind of stagnant, but the reason why the NHL retains its viewership regardless and is actually going to get a lot more viewership now that it's on ESPN is because of the upsets. So a few years ago, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the President's Trophy winners, the team that was the best team in the regular season, got upset by the Columbus Blue Jackets. They lost, they got swept 4-0 in the first round. And all of the first seeds in that same tournament, that same Stanley Cup playoff, were eliminated. And so as a fan, you're intrigued. Oh, so which team is going to come away with the Stanley Cup? That's what you're wondering. And so the reason why the NBA, and especially small market NBA teams, are having a problem packing their arenas, and when they are packed, they're full of opposing fans, is because people aren't sticking with teams. They're going to see one game a year at, or maybe, a couple of more at the closest stadium to them, but they're not cheering for the local team. They're cheering for the team from LA, or the team from Toronto, or the team from Philly, or Brooklyn, or whoever. And I say Toronto, I know Toronto's not that good now, but a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, they were a pretty good team. You can't deny that. They won the NBA Finals. To watch the Warriors as well, Golden State Warriors. And so, the reason why the NBA is going to continue to decline in viewership and in loyalty to teams is because people are not cheering for teams anymore. People are cheering for players. And that's the way it's getting with the MLB as well. And that will be entirely the case in a few years if it comes down to... The only difference, really, is that in the MLB there are more players, that you need to be productive. But, the MLB is entirely becoming a player-based league as well. It won't ever get to the point of the NBA, but it's... it'll get close as it can get for, a sport that requires more than just 5 players to participate at any given time. And so I know the NBA won't change the rules because a New York versus LA final will generate tons of revenue. But what revenue then are they losing in markets like, well, let me see which teams spend the least amount of money. The Warriors are actually spending the least amount of money. The thing is, the NBA has a really weird system where they have a cap, they have a salary, but they also have a luxury tax system. It's kind of a mixture of both. So, let's see, active or total cap. So the team that's spending the most money, the teams that are spending the most money, the Warriors at $168 million, but a lot of their guys are injured. The Nets, $166 million. The Sixers, $145 million. They are not hard cap teams, so to speak. The teams who are spending the least are the Knicks, somehow. The Thunder, the Hornets, the Magic, and the Pistons at 100 less than 120 million. That's a huge disparity. That's at least 40 million. Not as big as the MLB, but you compare the team that's spending the least amount of money. Well, I'm not going to use New York as an example because they could spend more and they have a ton of cap space. But the Thunder, kind of a small market team, $101 million. Warriors spending the most at $168 million. That is a difference, ladies and gentlemen, of almost $70 million between the team paying the most and the team paying the least. And as a result, the top 5 teams, 3 of the 5 teams that have spent the least amount of money are not good, to say the least. I mean, they're under 500. Whereas, on the other end of things, with the exception of the Warriors, all the teams that spend the most money are the ones that typically are making the playoffs. Or, are competing for a championship this year. While on the other end, the NHL, the teams that are spending the most money, the Leafs, yes. The Leafs are a pretty good... Well, the Leafs are also in cap hell. So the Leafs are going to have to make some moves this offseason. They have negative cap space at the moment. The Minnesota Wild, who are third. The Calgary Flames, who are, I think they're in a playoff spot, but just barely. No, they're not in a playoff spot. So the third team on that list, not in a playoff spot at the moment. The Capitals, the Canadiens, who wouldn't be in the playoffs if they weren't playing in that division. The Lightning, the Flyers, the Coyotes. Fifth, the Jets. Well, again, that's a Mickey Mouse division. But the Flyers at 7th. They're not in the playoffs, and they're not making the playoffs. The Predators, who are kind of rebuilding, but still somehow, on the verge of a playoff spot. You see the difference here? And then the teams at the bottom. Teams like the Blackhawks, who are, I think, right on the edge. Yeah, the Blackhawks are 5th. They're right on the edge, and they're in that weird Central Division. Let's see. The Kings actually are spending not a lot of money, and they're also kind of on the verge of a playoff spot. The Knights, the Golden Knights, they're probably the ideal team I should be talking about. They've spent the, let's see, sixth least amount of money, and they are currently, I know they're first in their division. They're third in the total NHL. That's why the NHL is different, and that's why the NHL rules should be the gold standard. You have teams that are small market teams that are spending not that much money, and they're still winning because they developed their guys. It's not about development in the NBA anymore. It's about buying players from other teams. You either play in a big market, find a way to buy players, you find great coaching to develop players, and hope you can retain them long enough that they want to play in that city long enough that you can win a championship, or you just fail to win a championship. And so with the last 4 champions of the NBA have come from Los Angeles, Toronto, and San Francisco. And the Spurs and Cavs, I'll say Cleveland is a small market team, just for argument's sake, or just to, give you something. The Spurs and Cavs are the only small market teams to win titles this decade, except for maybe the Pistons. But, Detroit's also kind of a large market. But if you think about that, the Spurs, Cavs, and Pistons are the only small market teams to win titles this century. And the Spurs organization was a model for small markets. I mean, they had great coaching, they had great players, they drafted great management. They are the model for what you have to do as a small market team. And they're lucky that guys like Tim Duncan were willing to take a cut on their salary in order to bring in guys like LaMarcus Aldridge and retain the players that they had, like Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker, who could have gone to any other team just to get money, form super teams in Brooklyn or Los Angeles or whatever. They could have gone and joined Kobe. They could have gone to New York and joined, well, no one was in New York at that time. They could have gone to Miami and joined Dwayne Wade and Shaquille O'Neal. You know, but they didn't. They stayed in San Antonio and they won 5-6 titles there. I think it was 5. 1998 or 1999, something like that. 2001, 2003, 2000. No, not 2001. It was 2003, 2005, 2007, 2014. So 5 titles. And then the Cavs had LeBron. They drafted LeBron with their first overall pick, and I don't know how you could get luckier. And he wanted to play in that city because it was closest to Akron, so which is his hometown. So, like I said, you either play in a big market, you find the money to buy players, you either try to develop players somehow and hope they stick around long enough, like the Spurs did with Duncan and Parker and Ginobili, or the Cavs did with LeBron and, well, Kyrie to an extent, except then Kyrie left for a big market, hence this argument, or you fail. Those are the only alternatives. And so teams that don't play in a desirable market and have lost for years are never going to regain that. They're never going to be able to compete. I mean, they might make the playoffs a few years, maybe fill up 3/4 of their venue when we get back to normal and they're allowed to have fans in and they make the playoffs one year, maybe, perhaps. But I mean, aside from the Bucks, and the Bucks haven't won a championship, but aside from the Bucks, what other small market teams are good right now? The Jazz, kind of. I mean, well, the Jazz, I'm not saying the Jazz are a bad team. But you take a look at the main contending teams, the teams that have been projected to win the finals. They're the Clippers, the Lakers, the Sixers, the Nets. Los Angeles, Philadelphia, New York. Big markets. Like I said, I'm removing myself as a Sixers fan here. The Sixers, though, did build up their team the right way. They didn't make that many trades. I mean, 2019, they didn't really build a super team by bringing in Jimmy Butler and Tobias Harris. They still had JJ Redick out there who couldn't play defense to save his life. So they were by no means a super team like the Brooklyn Nets. But the problem with the NBA is that they allow these super teams to form and then people lose interest as a result. And this is, like I said, not just the case for the NBA. This is sports as a whole that don't have a hard salary cap. People are obviously losing interest in teams that stink. I mean, like, people aren't showing up to games. If you went anywhere near the Wells Fargo Center when the Sixers stunk, and I know the Sixers weren't a small market team, but back when they stunk, they couldn't fill that arena up to save their lives. It was filled with fans of other teams. And so they were in a rebuild, and teams that constantly have to rebuild, because they don't have a lot of money and they rely on their success by growing and developing players, they wind up losing a good deal of the revenue because nobody wants to watch a losing team, which in turn leads to bandwagoning. So now fans are going to pay $150 for MLB TV, maybe a couple hundred for a jersey, or like $100, $150 for a jersey, but they won't be directly supporting the team they support by buying tickets. They won't be directly helping them generate revenue. They will be helping the league generate revenue and big market teams specifically generate revenue. But, if you live in, let's see, who is the worst small market team in the league right now? The Minnesota Timberwolves. There we go. If you live in Minnesota right now, you're probably not watching the Timberwolves. You're probably watching the Lakers, the Nets, probably not the Sixers, probably not the Jazz, but perhaps one of those teams. You're not cheering for the Minnesota Timberwolves right now if you live in Minnesota, with like a few exceptions. You're buying, and let's say that this is a normal year. Let's say that fans are allowed in full capacity at stadiums. Nobody is still going to Minnesota Timberwolves games unless they're playing the Nets or the Sixers or the Jazz or the Lakers or the Clippers or somebody that has, big name players and is on a path to be a championship contender. And so you're spending perhaps $300 total on a team, whereas you could be spending $500 on tickets for the home team for multiple games in a season. I can tell you firsthand, I spent more money for tickets and concessions and parking at Citizens Bank Park in 2019 as a Phillies fan than I ever did on merchandise and MLB TV as a Rays fan, back when I was a Rays fan. And so the conclusion is that big market teams are the only ones that still make a lot of money. And speeding up the game like the MLB is trying to do, or changing the way it's played, that won't do anything, because the problem is not the sport. The problem is that people don't want to watch their teams continuously lose, because they're deliberately continuously losing, because that's their only path to success, is by losing, getting a high draft pick, and then lucking out and hoping that that person winds up carrying their team to a championship. And that's especially true in the NBA when it's a very much player-heavy league, but also it's the case in the MLB where you have to develop hitting and pitching and coaching from the bottom up if you're a small market team in order to compete. And the Rays did that perfectly, but how many other small market teams have been able to do that successfully? And so could you imagine if the NBA or if the NHL had a luxury tax? Like the Kings, the Leafs, and the Bruins, they would pretty much own the league. Like the first line of the Leafs would be Draisaitl, Matthews, Eichel. Do you really think that's fair? And then Carolina, for example, or Florida, they would have a first line full of some other team's AHL guys. Current AHL guys. Because they'd be trading all these players over because they wouldn't have to worry about cap hit. They wouldn't have to worry about staying under the salary cap, because all they would do is just buy and sell players. They would just buy players and then ship off prospects, to teams that needed prospects, because prospects are the only way to succeed. So it's a disaster, to say the least. And the NBA is not going to fix this problem. And it's going to continue as a result. Viewership is going to go down. People are going to continue to have less interest in the NBA, and it's going to be that way perhaps with the NFL in a few years as well, because the Chiefs aren't going to be competitive too much longer now that they've lost two of their O-linemen, so they're basically going to be putting up the same numbers as they did in the Super Bowl every night, the most recent Super Bowl. But anyway, let's move on now to another beautiful topic. The Philadelphia Flyers. Wake me, please. Let me leave. Put me back with any other team. Like, right now, please, just give me a reason not to cheer for this team. I want to move. I'm moving. After I upload this, I'm moving to another city just to cheer for a different hockey team. Philadelphia Flyers. Are the Philadelphia Flyers right for putting up Shane Gostisbehere on waivers? And the answer is no. And I know I complain about Shane Gostisbehere a lot, so this kind of makes me sound hypocritical, but to get into this topic, into this question, is putting Shane Gostisbehere on waivers a good thing? The answer is no. To get into this topic, you have to analyze the rest of the team. In comparison to Shane Gostisbehere, are there players who are worse? So, I'm not saying, by any stretch of the imagination, that Shane Gostisbehere is good. He is far from a Norris winner. He is far from, what's the award they give to best offensive defenseman? It's like the opposite of the Selke Trophy, I think. I don't know what it's called, but he's not winning any awards for his defense. He's not making the NHL, well, there is no All-Star game. He's not making any first, second, or third teams. So he's not a good player. Is he worse than some other players on the team? No. Specifically, is he worse than Prosser, Haig, Sanheim, or even, well, I'm going to leave Justin Braun out of the conversation. He's actually been kind of good this year. But is Shane Gostisbehere worse than him? Is he worse than Sanheim or Haig or Prosser or hell, Myers has sucked recently? Provorov, except for yesterday, has been a turnover machine and then been, well, I shouldn't say turnover machine. He's not been good. You know, he has definitely underperformed this season, so that might have, you know, that might be part of my bias. But Shane Gostisbehere in no way is worse than any of these other guys on defense right now, or that are playing, you know, off the bench. And so, should the Flyers have traded him? The problem is, I don't think anybody wanted to trade for him. And you know, there's no rush to trade him. Your defense sucks. Either way. You still have Prosser, Haig, Sanheim, or Braun. Braun's been good. I'm not going to talk about Braun anymore. You have Prosser, Haig, Sanheim, and Meyer. Two of those guys, at the very least, Sanheim and Meyer, play every single night. And what do they do in return? They go -6 versus the New York Rangers and a 9-0 loss. So, should Shane Gostisbehere be put on waivers if you can't trade him? No, because he's better than those guys. He's better than the second pair. I don't get it. Keep him on the roster. And I was thinking initially that they were going to clear a spot for Matthias Ekholm. That's what they're doing. But Nashville's in a playoff spot right now. Even if they made a trade, and they just haven't announced it yet. They're waiting till tomorrow or whatever the hell they're doing. Of all the guys you could put on waivers, you put Shane Gostisbehere. The guy who, yes, we've been yelling about all of them. Let's be fair. We've been yelling about the entire defense. But you put Gostisbehere on waivers ahead of Haig? Ahead of Prosser? Have you seen the way those two have played this season? If this is the filling the gap, you've still got Haig and Prosser backing up. So let's say Provorov gets injured. Let's say Braun gets injured. Or, well, Sanheim and Myers, that wouldn't matter anyway. Who's on that third pair right now? That's Moran. Let's say Moran gets injured. Any of those guys gets injured. Do you know who's coming in for them? Nate Prosser or Robert Haig, who both suck. So what is the logic behind putting Gostisbehere on waivers? I don't get it. This team is definitely... It's so frustrating because, you know, at this point in the season, I've already kind of acknowledged that the Flyers are out of the playoffs, but they are 1 point out. The team above them still has 3 games in hand, but guess how many times the Flyers play them next week? 3 times. So they could... they're 0-5 versus this team this season, yes, but they're 4-4-2 in their last 10, whereas before the Bruins were a lot higher in the standings and had a lot, you know, they looked a lot better. And so let's say you even win 2 out of those 3 games, and you're cutting into their lead a little bit. And they're not going to win every game down the stretch. If you have the chance to win every game down the stretch, the Flyers realistically are not out of the playoff picture. In our minds they are because they suck. But if you look at the standings, they're very much in the mix for that 4th spot. Even though I've said this before, I don't think Boston is missing the playoffs. Even if Philadelphia plays well, I don't think Boston is going to miss the playoffs. But they're right there. They're right on the fringe. Somebody has to miss the playoffs. This is a wacky year, the way they're doing the divisions. So, you have the chance. I don't know. I don't know if this team's capable of making the playoffs. They don't look capable of making the playoffs, but a few ugly wins here and there, and maybe they're in. And then after that, all it takes is to beat Washington or something. And Washington chokes every year. And then, you might want to get redemption versus the Islanders if they play Pittsburgh and win again. Or, even Pittsburgh. They swept Pittsburgh to start the season. You get in the playoffs, you beat the choking Capitals, you beat Pittsburgh, who the Flyers hate and have beaten 3 out of 5 times this season somehow. Then you're on to whatever the equivalent of the conference finals this year is. Anyway. I hate this team. But anyway, let's move on now. NASCAR. First of all, before I even get into this topic, I want to say that the Bristol race, I didn't like at all. And it's a shame that they're going back there next year. And it's not because of dirt racing. It's because it wasn't really dirt. I'm not saying there was pavement. I'm saying it was rubber racing. And even still, at the end of the race, with all the rubber down, there was still dirt flying up, of course, because it was dust at that point. It was just rubber mixed in with dust was flying up and hitting drivers' windshields, and that's why there were so many wrecks, and they had to go single file because this was such a disaster that there were accidents on every goddamn restart. So, I hate that they're going back there next year. They should really just go back to Eldora. It was a stupid idea to put dirt over an already good track. I mean, they really got rid of a Bristol race, which are one of the 2 tracks that NASCAR fans love, aside from Martinsville. NASCAR fans love short track racing. If you've never been on social media before, you would at least know it. How do I phrase this? NASCAR fans just really basically, they love Martinsville and they love Bristol. And so you would think common sense would tell you, don't mess with those 2 tracks. Just add another track. Take away something like Texas, which is boring, or Kansas, which is really boring. And in its place, add Eldora. Or race again at Bristol. Who cares? You raced 4 times at Charlotte last season. You had like a full week where every single race was Charlotte. Do something like that. I don't care. Or not, well, I mean, obviously, logistically, they probably couldn't do that. But, just add another race there. It's really not that difficult of a business decision. Just add another race there. If you want to put dirt down, go do that. Or just go race at Eldora. I mean, that's a dirt track. You don't have to convert it. There's a lot less work. Anyway, on to the actual discussion I wanted to talk about regarding NASCAR. And this is going to be kind of a boring topic to wrap up with. But, should NASCAR still be promoting iRacing on social media? And the reason I'm talking about this is because for the past year, since COVID shut everything down, they've been promoting these iRacing events. And frankly, I don't know why people like it. And mind you, I am not a boomer. But this is going to be kind of the surprise to what I'm talking about here. Should NASCAR still be promoting iRacing on social media? My answer is yes, because apparently others seem to like it. It draws in a younger crowd, and it's basically as a result of drawing in a younger crowd, it's failing to do what the MLB wants to do, which is make young fans interested, and they can't do that, and they've tried to speed up the game, and they've lost the old fans to try to bring in the new ones who really don't care because they're all watching basketball or football. And so, the only reason I'm talking about this is because I want to rant about this for just a few short minutes. iRacing is not real racing. I cannot personally sit and watch somebody else play a video game, play a computer game. And I would like it if it stopped. But if it helps them generate revenue, I guess I don't have really any place in telling them to stop. I just think it's dumb That's really the only purpose of the segment, is for me to say that iRacing is dumb, and I think that it's that I don't like it. So anyway, we have finally arrived at the end of this podcast. So thank you everybody for watching this edition of Fairweather Fan. If you want to follow me on social media, it is at FairweatherFan, PHAN. Website is FairweatherFan, spelled the same way, .weebly.com. The links are in the description of YouTube, and then on Spotify, I think there's links up there as well. So you can copy and paste those. I don't know. I don't use Spotify that often. The Sixers are on right now. Let's see how they're doing. They're down 17-8. Jokic only has 2 points somehow. Oh, no, wait. Nope. He has 4. Somehow Michael Porter Jr. has 6 points. And Jamal Murray has 7. Jamal Murray has 7? Who the hell is Ben Simmons guarding? What, is Seth Curry guarding this guy? My lord. This is going to be a rough night. They're going to lose 2 straight. Sad. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.